Hey, so last week I released my Helix amp pack. This is just a gigantic folder that I keep online of all of my amp presets, effects, and stuff that I use the Helix for. I have the HX Stomp, so it's a little bit limited on my end, but I spend a lot of time tuning all of my amps, and then I put them in that folder, and you guys are free to use them as you like. So last week I finally released that, and so today's video I wanted to release 3 more amps I can throw in that folder. They're going to be dual amp presets, so there will be an amp on each side running in stereo. Now if you only run a mono rig, all you have to do is just connect 1/4 inch cable to your Helix device on startup and everything will be summed to mono automatically. So in a second we're going to jump over to HX Edit, where I'm going to show you all of the settings that I have for these dual amp sounds. And I think these setups with using 2 amps in the Helix is a great way to get a really full, dynamic, harmonically rich sound. Just using 2 amps gives you 2 different textures that you can combine together to kind of fill out the spaces in the frequency range where some amp models might be lacking. So say you have an AC30 and you really love the top end of it, but you're missing the bottom end that a jazz chorus could fill in. That, for example, is a great combination. Those 2 amps can work together and give you this huge, big sound. Using 2 amps in your Helix device is also a really great way to, if you decide to pan them hard left and right and you're running stereo, you can delay the sounds, and it's a great way to kind of fake having a second guitar player. If you're playing in a smaller ensemble and you're going for a really big sound, this is a great way to do that. So my presets are always free. They'll always be free in the form of I'm sharing my screenshots on the screen of all of my settings. You're not missing anything. But if you don't want to do that, I do offer the .hlx files. Find the link in the description. You can go through PayPal. It's a donation-based system, so anything from 1 cent to as much as you think the presets are worth. Suggested donation might be like $5. That'll get you access to my ever-expanding Helix library. I put a folder up on Google Drive, and every time I come up with a new preset and I perfect it or I update old ones, everything will be thrown right on there. So at any time, if you want to check back in a year or two, there's going to be some new stuff in there for you. I'm throwing 3 new presets on today, and I'm planning on keeping that going for the next couple months, where I throw a bunch of new ones in there every month for you. So if you're interested in that, the link is in the description, and your one-time donation is good for life. All right, so looking at the 3 presets here, we have numbers 15, 16, and 17. Those are what we're looking at in today's video. And then followed down underneath that is 3 more presets along the same lines. They're dual amp setups that I just haven't perfected yet. So give me a week or 2 on that, and you'll see a video on that coming out pretty soon too. If you're watching this in the future, check out the link right up here, if I remember to put it there, and that'll take you to that video. So we're going to start with number 15 here. This is DIS, that stands for direct. That's when I have amp simulations. All these amps, by the way, will be in the folder. Everything you see over here is in the folder right now. Anyway, DI stands for direct. That's when I have an amp and cabinet simulation in the preset stereo preset. So on all of these, started at 1M for if you're playing a humbucker guitar. That's what I recommend. If you're playing something with single coils, check it out. Test it between 1M and 230K. One of them might work better for you. Sometimes 230 works better for single coils, but sometimes I just keep it at 1M anyway. At the first split here, take balance A, send it all the way to the left, balance B, send it to the right, and we'll pair it back later there. We'll get to that in a second. So looking at the AC30 model, these are my settings. A little bit of drive. This is more drive on this preset than I generally like to keep. But something to watch out for if you're going to create your own presets is make sure that the 2 amps you're combining have the same amount of drive. So if you play a chord and you hold it out, especially if they're panned left and right, you're going to notice that one side of it is going to sustain longer. It's going to give you an unbalanced sound. So if you have more drive coming out of the AC30 than you did of the twin model on the other side, it's going to sound unbalanced, I think. So I just try to keep the same amount of drive, the same amount of sustain and volume from each side. So looking at the settings for the AC30, this is what I have. This is a brighter setting with a little bit of drive in it. I keep the ripple all the way down on most of my presets because it adds this weird subtone. It's useful if you're playing with a lot of drive, but I usually don't use the Helix for drive tones. I have an external drive pedal that I do for that. And then with the cab, I've paired it with the 2x12 Bluebell, the 30 dynamic mic. Pretty close right up on the cab because I have the bass control down lower in the preamp section. So I keep the mic pretty close and then the essential low cut and high cut. I've done my own fair share of purchasing and trying other people's presets, and generally I've found that a lot of people, they create presets that sound good when you're playing them in your bedroom. They have a whole lot of bass, but if you go and plug them into sound systems, if you're playing bigger stages or louder venues, it's just way too much bass. So I think a bass cut is pretty much essential on every Helix patch that you're doing for guitar or any other instrument. You need a bass cut. So low cut is at 75 hertz. That's on the lower side for most of my presets, just because I have the bass pretty low on this amp. And then high cut, this will get rid of some of those weird harmonics. A guitar amp speaker, I should say, doesn't really put out anything higher than 5K. So doing a cut at 7.8 kilohertz isn't going to cut anything that you need. Early reflections, I back that up a little bit just to give it a bit more of a room sound. And we'll look at the Fender Twin. These are my settings for that. Again, a little bit more drive than I'm used to on my presets. No ripple. And another thing you got to watch out for, it seems to sound fine on this preset just because of how the amp models work. But when you're pairing two amps, especially if you're panning them left and right again, make sure that they have a lot of the same bass response or mid response, just so that they don't sound unbalanced. Like if you have all your treble coming from one side and all your bass coming from one side, it's going to sound funky in a full mix. So I've got the US double normal amp model here for the Fender Twin. I love the Twin amp model in Helix. The 160 ribbon mic, a darker sounding microphone, backed up a little bit, 2 inches off the cab. There's your low cut, high cut. Early reflections, I added a little bit more here, and I'll talk about that a bit. I think that's important too. I recommend setting early reflections lower on one amp than it does on the other, and it gives you a little bit of, I think it's called the Hanna effect. So it's like a stereo widening tool, essentially. It's a trick on your ears. If you hear something coming from over here, if you snap to the left of you, you're going to hear that sound comes from the left side, and it's going to hit your left ear before it hits your right ear, and that's how you can tell, the stereo image of things. So if you keep everything at the same volume, but you put a little bit of delay on something, it's going to give you that effect. And I think that's a pretty cool thing to have when you're doing these dual amp stereo setups. You're going to see the Stomp Switch 3 over here in a couple of the settings. So I usually put that on drive, and then the level output on the amps. Again, for the other side, I should turn that back on. The drive and the level output, I assign that to Stomp Switch 3. So on my HX Stomp, foot switch number 3 is always going to be like a solo boost, about 5 or 6 decibels. And then going back, we're going to pair them back together. Now, if you're running a mono setup, you might as well just pan them dead center. Do that with both of them, but I pan them pretty much hard left and right. And then I account for any level disparities between the amps here as well, so that you're getting the same volume from each side. And then going on to the graphic EQ, I have it turned off to start the preset, but I have it assigned to Stomp Switch 2. So this is just another option when you get to a venue. All venues are different. Play through your preset and see if it sounds good. If it doesn't sound good, engage Stomp Switch 3 and see if that sounds better for you. And that's all I have going on with that. This is just my volume patch, which if you don't use an expression with your HX Stomp or anything, that's a free slot you can get rid of. Same with the effects loop. I use the effects loop for my reverbs and delays. So in all my presets, I have the effects loop there. And then finally, just one effect that I threw in there. Nothing special about that. It's just a stereo tremolo. And when I make all my presets, I try to make them in the same volume. So in the output block here, this is where I adjust the level. So I have unity gain between all my presets. So if I'm switching between stuff during one set, if I'm switching between sounds during one single set, all my levels are going to be the same. So I don't have the sound guy having to ride the fader. So this is what this sounds like. I'll play it with humbuckers and with single coils. Moving on to the next setup, we've got a Matchless and a twin combo. Along the same lines here, check out your input impedance. I always set it to 1M or 230K like I mentioned before. Split it exactly the same as I did before. And then our first one here is the twin US double vibrato. It's a little bit brighter than the normal twin that we had on the last preset. So I've adjusted that with the EQ a little bit. It gives a different character of sound, which I think is pretty cool. And then I've paired it with the deluxe cabinet. So here's my settings for the US double vibrato. And then the deluxe cab. A little bit less gain on this preset than on the other one. With a U87 model microphone backed up 3 inches off the cab. A little bit more of a bass cut there. And then we'll switch over to the Matchstick Ch1. That's the model I'm using for this. It's a Matchless model. And with a Supro cabinet. I just use combined amp cabinet combinations in these presets to save space. Since I use the HX Stomp, I'm limited to only 6 blocks. But you can combine them with your own IRs, and I'm sure they can sound great. Maybe you'll improve them a little bit too. Make sure you leave a comment if you decide to do that and what your results were so that we can follow along. There's my settings for the Matchless. And then for the Supro cab. Early reflections, 5% on the Supro. Early reflections, 15% for the Fender Twin. And then pan them as you want to. Adjust the levels if you need to. And again, I have foot switch 3 triggering, a bit of drive, and also the level control. 1.5 over here versus 0. That gives it a little bit of a boost for solos. And then again, an optional EQ block. If it doesn't sound good in the room you're in, try that and see what happens. Onto the volume and the effects loop, that doesn't matter. And then a stereo flanger that I like the sound of. And then I don't have any difference here with the output. So this is just at unity gain. And that'll sound with the same output volume as the other does. I'll give you a playing sample of that right now, and then we'll move on to the final preset. So for the final preset of this video, I have a Dr. Z and a Matchless combo, panned left and right again, always. And check your input impedance as always. I just have a chorus effect there. And then here is where we're going to split the amps left and right. On the left side, we have the Matchless combo with a 2x12 Matchless H30 cabinet. Here are my settings. Again, all of my presets I designed to be used with external gain pedals since I use the HX Stomp. That's just how I like to run my whole setup. But if you're using a full Helix, a Helix LT, you can use your own. You can use the amp drive and trigger that with a Stomp switch, or you can add in extra gain pedals in the circuit, and it'll work well too, I imagine. There's the settings for the Matchstick, and then the cabinet, early reflections at 5%, 160 ribbon microphone, and the level here is just making up for some volume differences. So since the cabinet, since the preamp here is a little bit lower volume, I've compensated for that in the cabinet block. Moving on to the other amp, the Interstate Zed is the Dr. Z combo. I matched it with a Vox cab. Here are my settings for that. Pretty low gain because this is a higher gain amp model. And there's the settings for the Vox 414 condenser, which is a pretty bright microphone. I think these two amps sound best together. Out of this video, this is probably my favorite preset of the three. And then again, adjusting for volume in the level block there. Combine them back together. I panned the Matchless, the Matchless to the left there and the Dr. Z to the right. And then my volume block, effects loop, and then finally a stereo tremolo effect. Again, I love that sound. I don't have an EQ block, an optional EQ like I do on the others, just because I think this is going to sound pretty good in most any environment. So this is what this preset sounds. Hope you guys enjoyed that video. Let me know if any of those 3 presets interested you, and of course let me know if you have any recommendations for stuff you'd like me to work on in the future. Link to the Helix preset pack is down in the description. Be sure to leave your email so I know where I can send everything. Thanks for watching. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to stay up to date to more Helix videos that I've coming out. That'll be thrown in that folder, and I'll see you next time.